Hello and welcome to the Election Show on the Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Greer. I'm an associate professor of political science at Fordham University and co-host of the New York-centered podcast FAQ NYC. Joining me today via Zoom are Matt McDermott, who's a communication strategist and vice president of Whitman Insight Strategies. And also with me is political analyst and professor of political science at Columbia University, Lincoln Mitchell. Hello again.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you
Good
both.
to see
you. So today we're going to talk about national politics. And I want to start with the president and so the fact that politics is getting a little dirty when it comes to this president. And Lincoln, I'll start with you. Is this above average from what we've seen in the past as far as the president attacking his opponents and his opposing party?
You know, there's a certain kind of way that older people, and I would put myself in that category, like to tell younger people, oh, this is not as bad as what it was. And we saw that in the beginning of the Trump administration, where people are saying this, when a baby boomer says Watergate was worse, what they mean, that's the political equivalent of saying, hey man, you should have been at Woodstock, right? Politics has always been dirty. This is something different. This is something really quite different. Just one example. The president, first of all, the medium of Twitter, it's impossible to know how, I don't know, Richard Nixon or LBJ at their really most erratic moments might have used a medium like Twitter. But several months out before the election, Donald Trump is already not just beginning, in the middle of undermining the credibility of the election because he's 15 points underwater and knows he's going to lose, right? That is a new kind of dirty politics. That's dirtier than pointing out that somebody had an affair, or that someone was corrupt, or spreading a lie about someone, or thinking of some clever rhyme that didn't really matter. This is really different than that. This is, you know, the Willie Horton ad, which was a not particularly subtle, a racist campaign by people supporting George H.W. Bush, was rightly condemned as being racist right at the moment. But the Willie Horton ad is a Sunday school picnic compared to the everyday racism, and not just racism, the misogyny, the anti-Semitism, the homophobia that we see from this administration. So this is much worse. And people who are trying to tell you otherwise are just telling you that they're old.
Matt, what do you think as a strategist?
So there's been this idea for years now that the Trump campaign is some level above Democrats, that they're playing this game of 32-dimensional chess and we're just behind the curve. What you're seeing over the past few weeks is just a pure franticness of their campaign. And you see the president in the White House literally flailing around, trying to grasp onto something that can resuscitate his failing campaign at the moment. You've seen them go from this bizarre argument for a week about Obamagate, which was just ludicrous. You now see him this week attacking the presumptive Democratic nominee, Joe Biden, for wearing a mask in public, even though his own CDC guidance recommends that you do wear a mask in public. And it's just a strange strategy. My firm this week actually just released research. Sure, 76% of voters think it's important to wear a mask in public. That's true among Democrats, it's true of independents, it's true of Republicans. 67% of Trump voters thinks it's important to wear a mask in public. Meanwhile, you have the president going on national TV and saying that it's ludicrous for Joe Biden to wear a mask in public. There is no strategy at the moment from his presidential campaign. And so what instead you've seen is them essentially try to manufacture news, manufacture outrage over the last few weeks, and it's not doing them any good. They've made no rebound in the polls. They continue to have a pretty significant disadvantage against Joe Biden, in part because they haven't been able to land a message that actually makes sense to the average voter who's sitting at home right now worried about a public health crisis, and tens of millions of whom are currently out of work with no plan from this administration how to get them back into the workforce. It is an odd strategy when you would think that the best thing the president could do right now to resuscitate his campaign would be to overcome this public health crisis and get people back to work. He's doing neither of those. And so you see this strange flailing attempt at a campaign.
Well, I think what's been frustrating to watch is this kind of governance by chaos. And now we're seeing a campaigning by chaos where you just never know which way to look. Every day it's a series of news stories. You know, we've talked about this, the three of us, ad infinitum about how what we're outraged about at 8 a.m. is totally different than what we're outraged about by noon, by 4 o'clock, by 7, and then by 10 o'clock, based on the tweets or whatever the president decides to do. And so in this campaign, because he knows that he's underwater in the polls, because he's got an elderly population that is struggling financially and with health. We've seen 100,000 Americans have already died due to COVID alone. And we've also heard the president sort of essentially call on Russia and China to help fix the election in any way. We're now starting to hear more anxiety from Americans, not just Democrats, but people really worried about whether or not we will have a free and fair election on November 3rd of this year. We've had elections during the Civil War. We've had elections during the Spanish flu season and during really strong crises in our nation. I mean, Lincoln, should Americans be concerned that this president in his chaotic governance and campaigning structure isn't really worried about being underwater 15% nationally because he's got something else in store based on mail-in votes or going to the ballot?
I don't think Americans should be worried that this won't be a free and fair election. I think they should recognize that it's already not a free and fair election, that the 2016 election in the United States didn't meet international standards for free and fair elections, and this one won't either. I work on elections all over the world. I read documents that tell you what the international standards are. I evaluate elections. I brief foreign elected foreign governments on this stuff. The 2016 did not meet the standards, and 2020 won't. So should we be worried about it? No, we should recognize it and try to do something about it. And we also must recognize that in the United States, there are a lot of differences, as you may know, between the Democrats and the Republicans on a whole range of issues that people are going to vote on in November. But a key issue, a key difference between these two parties is that the Democratic Party believes in small d democracy. The Republican Party does not. At its core, the Republican Party does not want this to be a country where every individual has equal access to the franchise and is able to use the franchise. At its core, the Republican Party does not want this to be a country where there is freedom of speech and assembly. At its core, the Republican Party doesn't want this to be a country where every religion or lack of religion, if you don't believe in any higher power, is treated equally. So that is the core, and I don't want to say the, but a core difference between the parties. And Donald Trump is just an extreme example of that. Where Donald Trump differs from, I don't know, some of his predecessors in the White House on the Republican side, but also in the legislature on the Republican side, is his willingness to do what you talked about, which is to go to Moscow for help, to go to Beijing for help, to go to wherever it might be. And that's because Trump is not interested in, Bill Barr, for example. Bill Barr is clearly trying to construct the post-democratic semi-authoritarian America, right? He is trying to change the rule of law to put it in service of the Republican Party and the government in power. He wants to institutionalize a white Christian America, right? I don't particularly agree with that vision in any way, but Donald Trump's vision is different. Donald Trump wants Donald Trump to get rich, and Donald Trump and the 5 people, and that may be more, maybe fewer than that he actually cares about to stay out of jail. And to do that, he will do anything. And that includes going to Moscow and going to Beijing for help. The other thing I just want to follow on something Matt said very quickly, because I very much agree about this kind of campaign by chaos, and these are not strategic geniuses here. But if you are working for the Trump campaign, if you are a senior advisor or something like that, which I am not, you may have picked up on that in this discussion, but I am not. But if you were, you are spending an enormous amount of your time managing an erratic, mentally unstable president with extremely poor political judgment, right? So what you're doing is, instead of trying to craft, I don't know, a clever campaign commercial or a clever targeting strategy, you're just trying to get the president to shut up. So even if they are smart, they can't behave intelligently because he is such a wild card and such a drag on their time and attention.
I think that's right. And I think you've seen over the past week or so, the president continue to call into question the fairness of this election, even though it's he himself who is propagating the unfairness in our democracy at the moment, from everything from should we have an election to can we facilitate new electoral reforms, which many Republican states, I might add, already have in terms of mail-in voting, early voting, things like that. to ensure that voters have the proper way to literally cast a vote this November. And so instead of trying to win the election, they're trying to call into question the legitimacy of the election. They are seeing the same poll numbers the rest of us are seeing. They're not in great shape right now. And I agree with Lincoln completely. The Republican Party, and this isn't just true of Trump, this has been true for decades, is against democracy, is against people participating in our democracy to the fullest extent. They're against people having an easy and convenient and accessible access to their polling place. And so this is just a manifestation of a problem we've seen in the Republican Party for decades. On the flip side, I think the good news is that an overwhelming majority of voters completely disagree with that notion of our democratic system and of our elections. I mean, in polling over the last week, 2/3 or more of voters agree with the idea that it's important to have mail-in voting this election. And that's true across political stripes. Most Trump voters think they should be able to vote this election by mail-in voting. So this is not an attempt necessarily to restrict access to the polls. More so, this is an attempt to just draw into question the legitimacy of this election itself. Do I think that'll work? No. But that's clearly what they're trying to do so that come election day, win or lose, they can call into question whether this was a fair election. That is a problem moving forward. I think to Lincoln's point, it is a challenge Democrats are going to have even post-November. How do you get voters to accept the fact that a political party in this country is against the interests of the American people participating in that democracy? That is a huge problem that goes beyond Donald Trump, and something that we really need to reckon with both heading into November and thereafter.
Right. I mean, I think what's been so surprising to some Americans is to hear Republicans essentially say the loud part quiet and the quiet part loud. And this is governors and senators, not just the president, but Republican elected officials across the country, essentially saying, we don't want everyone to participate, and we will have to do our best within the confines of the laws that we're massaging to make sure that we can almost cherry pick our own voters. And in doing so, though, we're seeing some Americans just become so disgusted with the political process because they're hearing constant fighting from both sides and not necessarily listening to the nuance of the argument. What do we do with, we'll always have a certain number of Americans who don't participate, who choose not to participate even though they're eligible. But it seems as though even with such crucial times, with COVID, with rampant unemployment, with the entire economy, American economy on the brink in many ways, you still see such a large portion of voting eligible citizens choosing not to participate. What do you think is really motivating that? And can either candidate inspire those individuals to get off the sidelines?
Yeah, and it's why, your point's exactly right. And it's why the continued mobilization around the Democratic Party is so important. I mean, more than anything else this year, it'll be a mobilization race similar to 2018. And you saw, the output of that mobilization, which was record turnout come election day in 2018. I think we should expect, given everything that's going on, we will have a record turnout this year, in part because there's no bigger driver of turnout for Democrats in the past 4 years than Donald Trump on the ballot. Simply having Donald Trump on the ballot is enough to motivate the average person to go out and vote on election day, which in part is why you see the Biden campaign essentially running the campaign that they're running, which is to take a bit of a backseat and essentially just make the case as to why Trump failed America, not only over the past few months, but over the past 4 years. I think as we head into summer, particularly with questions around the convention, the Democrats need to figure out more ways to engage their voting population, both in terms of small dollar fundraising, but also just in terms of organization and engagement in their communities. We will need a mass mobilization of people talking to their neighbors, talking to voters in their communities about the importance of this election, which I think at the end of the day will get us to a record turnout, which will be good for Democrats. But that mobilization needs to continue. the good news is you look at polling and it would tend to suggest that Democrats are more engaged come this point in the election cycle than they have for the last decade, which is great. The question is, can we sustain that? And then can we move that energy into action come November?
Right. Lincoln, your thoughts?
Well, it is true that what mobilizes voters most is something to vote against. And Donald Trump has given Democrats a lot to vote against, and he has proved very good at mobilizing Democrats. Unfortunately for Democrats, he's also proved reasonably good at mobilizing his own base. So both bases will be excited here. And the election will be decided in the margins, which means those swing voters will be important. If you want to talk about low voter turnout, there are some other factors here. One is the Electoral College. If you live in about 70% of the United States in terms of population, you're in a state where the outcome is already known. So the real, like you cannot tell someone in California that your vote is essential. Now, you should vote if you live in California, and many people will out there. And obviously there are congressional districts there where it's very close. But for many Americans, the electoral system really dampens enthusiasm for voting. You know your vote doesn't matter in advance. I also think that we just, we're still a few months out and we don't know what will occur between now and then. Lord knows what will occur between now and the election, but we also don't know what the context will be. It is, to me, very likely we'll have, and I hate to say this, at least 200,000 deaths from COVID. We're at about 100 now. We're going to be between 750 and 1,500 a day if things go well, right? So we could have 200,000, but we also could have a feeling with one of these, a trough in the deaths in a moment, people feel okay going out. So there's a lot of variables here. And it also means that the ability to do more conventional campaigning, not for Joe Biden himself, who is older, and has to be aware of that. And also, shaking 1,000 hands is not a great idea for anybody right now. But door to door will be possible from 6 feet away. Knock on the door, take 6 steps back. In communities that aren't apartment buildings like New York. So I think there will be ways to do that. One of the effects of people staying home so much is that they are spending, if they have internet access, more time online, more time on social media. So that will be important. My sense is I agree with Matt, this will be a reasonably high turnout election, but it will be a strange election with barriers to voting put in odd places. And one of the things we talk about with vote by mail is that we could say that I want the state of Wisconsin to have vote by mail, right? But what does that actually mean, right? Does it mean you have to have a mailing address rather than a P.O. box, right? What about some communities where people have to get 5 miles away to get to a post office to drop off a mailbox to drop off a letter? Do you put is it prepaid postage for the return? Millennials, I said this before on the show, haven't bought postage stamps. And my son has no idea. My sons have no idea to buy a postage stamp other than to ask me for one, right? So there's all these little things. Vote by mail is an important step in the right direction, but implementing it in a way that encourages people to vote, that makes it easier for people to vote, which, by the way, is part of the international standards for free and fair elections. The role of the state is to make it easier, not harder for people to vote. So there's a lot of variables here and a lot of unknowns.
Right. Well, it's interesting. When I was speaking to Susan Lerner, who's the head of Common Cause in New York, she made a really valid point. Adding to what you said, Lincoln, for vote by mail to work, we also have to have an accurate voting scroll. Like the names on the roll have to be complete. And we know that most states, in New York is not doing well with this either. Many states don't have a complete voting file.
Voter registration drives will raise a different set of challenges, because voter registration drives often are done in person. If you email someone a link and say, "Are you registered?" they're not going to. But if you get somebody, have a nice chat, tell them why it's important from the grocery store or in their neighborhood. And that, I think, is something we have to think about. How are we going to make sure, to go to your point, you certainly can't get people on a list if they're not registered, right?
Right, exactly.
The voter reg, which happens earlier in most states, has to be a priority. I have to think creatively about how to do that.
Right, and many states obviously have so many different rules and laws about how you register to vote. Many states do not have same-day voting registration. It's a 2-stage, pretty complicated process. And for people who were, going back to Matt's point, who are really struggling financially, this is, even though voting is incredibly important to their larger lives, that's more of a long-term abstract concept that many people don't have time to really to assess right now. I mean, when thinking about 2016 and we saw Democrats, many assumed Hillary Clinton was the heir apparent, and so we saw some folks could have turned out to vote and did not. We also have to remember that many people, especially communities of color, went to the ballot box for the first time without the full protection of the Voting Rights Act. So the institutional mechanisms that are there to protect us weren't in place. But I want to circle back to something Matt said and get both of your opinions on this, because Lincoln, you said, Joe Biden is 77 right now, and he's not out there shaking hands and pounding the pavement. And Matt, I believe the phrase you said is Biden's using a backseat strategy, and he has to right now. But at a certain point, maybe over the summer, especially as we see folks moving out into cities, I think people want to see a little bit more of Joe Biden. There were lots of news stories about him laying the wreath on Memorial Day, and people saying this is the first time we've seen him out and about in 2 months. So I think there might be an expectation that he is coming out into the public. And what could and what should that look like for Joe Biden? Matt, I'll start with you. This summer, as he starts to emerge, should he go for the younger people who were still not really motivated to vote? Should he shore up the sort of definite bases of the party, multiple bases, just to ensure them that he is there with them and he has the messaging and the momentum that they need and want him to have? Should he focus just on the swing state people and the folks that possibly lean a little Obama to Trump? What should be his focus as he emerges this summer?
And the challenge for Joe Biden is a media challenge, right? Is you saw it with the Memorial Day activity by the former vice president this weekend. Until Donald Trump caused a media storm around Joe Biden for wearing a mask, as he should in public, no national news network covered Joe Biden's Memorial Day activities. He had 0 minutes dedicated to that Memorial Day activity on any of the nightly newscasts. And so that's the problem, as it's been for years for Democrats in this environment, is if it doesn't involve Donald Trump, it does not get the necessary media coverage.
Or gas.
Correct, or gas by Joe Biden, correct. And so that's a problem. And I think they have adjusted their strategy to that, which is to say, well, if the media is not going to cover us anyway, let them just spend their time taking on Donald Trump in the way that they have, given the circumstances that exist. So that's sort of the challenge for Biden, in part, is just whatever he does, he's not going to get the media coverage deserved of a presumptive nominee. And so I think they've adjusted their campaign to that point. The other thing I'll add, which is different from 2016, which I don't think we talk about enough, is to your point exactly, come Election Day 2016, most voters, 65% of voters, thought Hillary Clinton was going to win that election. A majority of voters, in part because of apprehension by Democrats, think Donald Trump is going to win this election. And most importantly, of voters who don't like either candidate, which is a fairly sizable number of voters, in 2016, those voters voted for Donald Trump by a 2-to-1 margin. This election, those voters currently support Joe Biden by almost a 2-to-1 margin. We need to recognize the fact that presidential campaigns aren't just likability races. At the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of people that vote. And frankly, there's going to be a sizable number of people that vote that aren't particular fans of either candidate. At the moment, those voters overwhelmingly support Joe Biden. The single best thing he can do to maintain that lead is to let Donald Trump be Donald Trump. Because come Election Day, they will only be going to the polls as a referendum on Donald Trump. And so they will have decided come November, you know what? I like the fact that our president has led over 100,000 deaths. I like the fact that 30 million Americans are out of work because of Donald Trump. Or they'll say, you know what? I'm sort of sick of what we've had to deal with the last 4 years. Let me vote for the alternative. The Biden campaign is actually opportune at the moment because it doesn't need to do a lot to make the case to voters because his opponent is making that case for him.
Lincoln, what do you think?
I would add a couple of things. I'm not as familiar with the data as Matt is, but my understanding of the data is that most voters take these health precautions seriously. So ridiculing Joe Biden for wearing a mask is not a good campaign tactic. By the way, I thought Biden looked great in that mask. I thought he looked tough. I thought he looked like a leader. I thought he looked, frankly, much better than Donald Trump would in a mask, which maybe is why Trump doesn't wear a mask. But what I'm getting at here in a more serious way is that Biden needs to campaign not only in the way that thinks about his health, but the health of his voters and how Americans of all kinds are going to be behaving differently because of this. So, for example, you can't go to a county fair, right? I think the state of Ohio, Mike DeWine, who's been one of the best Republican governors on this issue, has canceled the Ohio County Fair. You can't go to, I don't know, a church setting and campaign there. You can't really even do just kind of street campaigning. You certainly can't do rallies. So even if he can do it, now Trump can, because a good chunk of his base believes that the COVID-19 virus is a hoax. And I think Trump in his heart won't believe it's real unless he gets it, because that's how his mind seems to work. So even if Biden feels comfortable, it is difficult. And laying low, I mean, Trump, Matt said something very important early on, which is there's this kind of mythos that the Trump campaign is brilliant. But Trump has been in office now for 3.5 years, and I'm speaking figuratively, not literally, but they haven't added a single voter, right? They've not picked up a single supporter. And in fact, just because of age replacement, they're starting out behind the 8 ball, right? And now he's going out there every day and giving people and behaving in a way that pushes voters away while solidifying his base. And by the way, I'm going to disagree with Matt on something. It's not going to be 100,000 deaths on election day. And I say this with great sadness because like many New Yorkers, I've lost people close to me. It's going to be 200,000. And that's twice as many reasons to vote against Donald Trump. So Biden has to be out there. He has to be visible, but he doesn't have to be doing too much of it. Because the best thing for Joe Biden right now is not only Donald Trump, but Donald Trump's inability to recognize that and to change his behavior. But one last quick point. Trump's relationship with his base has always been important because it is the base that is going to keep him in power in the post-election scenario. And when you went through the kind of voter suppression challenges, you left one off, which historically has been very important in the United States going back for a very long time, which is violence and the threat of violence at people of color seeking to exercise their franchise. And I would not at all be surprised to see that in much more this year than in previous election cycles. And we've already seen Trump mobilizes people to take up guns to protest the decisions of Democratic elected officials. Right. It's a very short step to say, go hang out around a polling place with an AK-47 or some other serious weapon.
We've already seen him encouraging it in the Michigan State House and asking Virginians to take up arms to protect their potato farms. Okay, so this is the last question before I let you all go. Does Joe Biden debate Donald Trump? Or shall I say, should Joe Biden debate Donald Trump? Matt, I'll start with you. No, actually, Lincoln, I'll start with you, and then I'll end with Matt, the strategist. Really briefly before I let you go.
If the debates happen, my sense is that Biden has to say yes. He's not a great, in 2008 he was an excellent debater. I don't think he's a great debater now, but he has to debate Donald Trump if Trump will, and if that is the plan, yes.
Okay, Matt, what do you think?
Absolutely. The only thing that calls into question whether there will be debates is Donald Trump. And the Trump campaign has consistently said that they are uninterested in participating in debates, in part because he's terrible at debates. He can't stand on a stage for 90 minutes and talk to the average voter in the way that anyone can in this country. And so, yeah, Joe Biden, of course, is going to participate in the debates. I think the question at the moment is, what does the format and structure look like, given the fact that the current president is a bit too much of a baby to want to participate?
Well, he does like those 2-hour briefings where he just stands up and riffs off the cuff. So we'll see how that goes. So that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for being here with me. I'm Dr. Christina Greer. You've been watching the election show on MNN. Thank you again to my guests, Matthew McDermott and Lincoln Mitchell. Thanks so much for tuning in.